Nothing wrong with making money, lots of it. In fact, it's just not a goal that will make you successful. Reading the bewilderment on Joe's face, he nodded and put his hand up to signal that he would explain. You want to understand success, yes? Joe nodded. All right, I'm going to share my trade secret with you now. Pindar leaned forward a bit and softly spoke one word: giving. Joe waited for more, but apparently that was it. I beg your pardon? Pindar smiled. Giving? Repeated Joe. Pindar nodded. That's the secret to your success? Your trade secret? Giving? Indeed, said Pindar. Ah, said Joe. Well, that's too simple, even if it were true, which it can't possibly be, asked Pindar. Is that what you're thinking? Something like that? Joe admitted sheepishly. Pindar nodded. Most people have the reaction. In fact, most people just laugh when they hear that the secret to success is giving. He paused. Then again, most people are nowhere near as successful as they wish they were. Joe certainly couldn't argue that point. You see, Pindar continued, the majority of people operate with a mindset that says to the fireplace, first give me some heat, then I'll throw on some logs. Or that says to the bank, give me interest on my money, then I'll make a deposit. And of course, it just doesn't work that way. Joe frowned, trying to parse the logic of Pindar's examples. You see, you can't go in two directions at once. Trying to be successful with making money as your goal is like trying to travel a superhighway at 70 miles an hour with your eyes glued to the rearview mirror. He took another thoughtful sip and waited for Joe to process his thought. Joe felt as if his brain were going 70 on the highway in reverse. Okay, he began slowly. So you're saying successful people keep their focus on what they're giving, sharing, whatever? He saw Pindar nod. And that's what creates their success. Exactly, cried Pindar. Now we're facing the same direction. But wouldn't an awful lot of people take advantage of you? Excellent question, Pindar said. Set his cup down and leaned forward. Most of us have grown up seeing the world as a place of limitation rather than as a place of inexhaustible treasures. A world of competition rather than one of co-creation. He saw that Joe was puzzled again. Dog eat dog, he explained, as in, oh sure. We'll act polite on the surface, but let's face it, it's really every man for himself. That about sums it up? Joe admitted that it did about sum it up indeed. That's certainly what he believed anyway. Well, said Pindar, it's simply not true. He noted Joe's skeptical look and continued. Have you ever heard people say you can't always get what you want? Joe grinned. You mean the Rolling Stones? Pindar smiled. Actually, I imagine people were saying that well before Mick Jagger's time. But yes, that's the general idea. You're not going to tell me that's not true, are you? That we actually do get what we want? No, said Pindar. That one is true. In life, you often don't get what you want, but he leaned forward again, and his voice grew softer with emphasis. Here's what you do get. You get what you expect. Joe frowned again, trying to mentally test out the truth of the last thought. Pindar leaned back and sipped his coffee, watching Joe. After a moment's silence, he continued. Or put it another way, what you focus on is what you get. You've heard that expression? Go looking for trouble, and that's what you'll find. Joe nodded. It's true, and not only about trouble, it's true about everything. Go looking for conflict, and you'll find it. Go looking for people to take advantage of you, and they generally will. See the world as a dog-eat-dog place, and you'll always find a bigger dog looking at you as if you're his next meal. Go looking for the best in people, and you'll be amazed at how much talent, ingenuity, empathy, and goodwill you'll find. Ultimately, the world treats you more or less the way you expect to be treated. Pindar paused for a moment to let Joe absorb that thought, then added one more. In fact, Joe, you'd be amazed at just how much you have to do with what happens to you. Joe drew a breath, so he spoke his next thought slowly, thinking it through out loud. You're saying people don't take advantage of you because you don't expect them to? That because you don't put any focus on selfishness and greed, even when it's all around you, it doesn't have much impact on you. Then he had a flash of inspiration. Like a healthy immune system, the disease is all around you, but you don't catch it, Pinder's eyes sparkled. Wonderful. That's an exquisite way of putting it. He kept talking as he scribbled in a little notebook that he had produced from his inside jacket. I have to remember that. You mind if I use that bit of brilliance? No, go ahead, Joe gestured grandly. Take my brilliance. I'm full of it. He paused, then added, at least that's what my wife always says. Pinder burst out laughing as he slipped his little notebook back into the unseen pocket. He put both hands on his knees and looked directly at the younger man. Joe, I'd like to do something with you. I'd like to show you what I call my 5 laws of stratospheric success. If you can make a little time, say every day for a week. Seriously? Joe nearly stuttered. For a week? I don't know how much time I could take off. Pinder waved his hand vaguely as if to say, time means nothing. Not a problem. All we need is 1 hour a day, your lunch hour. You do take time for lunch every day. Joe nodded, dumbfounded. The man was going to meet with him every day for a week and hand over the details of his most valuable trade secret. First, though, Pinder continued, you'll need to agree to my conditions. Joe's heart sank. The conditions? He had forgotten all about that. It was only after he agreed to Pinder's conditions. Brenda had said that they would set up further meetings. Joe gulped. I really don't have the means. Pinder held up his hands. Please don't worry. It's nothing like that. So? Joe began. So, do I need to sign an NDA or... This brought a big booming laugh from Pinder. No non-disclosure agreements. If anything, the opposite. I call these 5 laws my trade secret, not because I don't want people to find them, but for exactly the opposite reason. I call them my trade secret so that people will find them, so they'll seek them. So they'll place the proper value on them because it's really a term of honor. Excuse me? Joe was lost. Pinder smiled. The word itself, secret. Originally it meant something treasured, something sifted, weighted, and set apart for its special value. Actually, if I had my way, everyone would know these 5 laws. In fact, he added, that's exactly why I have put these conditions in place. Actually, it's just one condition. Are you ready? Joe nodded. I need you to agree that you will test every law I show you by actually trying it out, not by thinking about it, not by talking about it, but by applying it in your life. Joe started to give his assent, but Pinder stopped him and continued, and that's not all. You must apply each law right away. The same day you first learn it. Joe looked at Pinder to see if he was kidding. Seriously? Before I go to sleep that night, or I'll turn into a pumpkin. Pinder's face relaxed into a grin. No, you have a point. You won't turn into a pumpkin, but if you don't abide by my condition, our meetings will come to an end. But, Joe stammered, not to sound impertinent, how would you know? Another excellent question. How would I know? Pinder nodded thoughtfully. I wouldn't, but you would. It's the honor system. If you don't find a way to apply each law I show you the very same day you learn it, I'll trust that the next morning you'll call Brenda to cancel the rest of our appointments. He looked at Joe. I have to know you're taking this seriously, but here's what's far more important. You have to know you're taking this seriously. Joe nodded slowly. I think I understand. You want to make sure I'm not wasting your time. Fair enough. Pinder smiled. Joe, no offense, but you don't have that power. Joe looked confused. I mean the power to waste my time. Only I can do that. And truthfully, it's a vice I gave up a long time ago. The reason for my condition is that I don't want to see you wasting your time. Joe looked down and saw Pinder's outstretched hand. He took it and gave it a firm shake. He felt a thrill go through him as if he had just embarked on an adventure worthy of Indiana Jones, and mirrored the chairman's broad smile with one of his own. You've got a deal. Chapter 3. The Law of Value. Just before noon that Monday, Joe arrived at the great stone mansion eager to see what lay in store. All he knew was that he would be meeting with Pinder and a friend of his, a real estate magnate who had agreed to talk with Joe about the first law of stratospheric success. Joe still wondered about this whole giving business and whether or not this trade secret contained anything that would really work for him, but sure working for Pinder. He mused as he drove up the broad tree-lined drive, and it wasn't just the man's resume and magnificent property. The guy radiated success, he thought. It's not just money. It's something far more powerful than money. He had thought about nothing else all weekend and still couldn't quite identify what that something was. Pinder stood, waiting for him as he rounded the circular drive and put up on the stone steps. Before Joe could cut the engine, Pinder opened the passenger's door and hopped in. Okay, if we take your car? Don't want to be late for our meeting. Joe felt a stab of disappointment. He wasn't going to get any of Rachel's famous coffee after all. Here, said Pinder as he buckled himself into the seat and handed over a giant mug of steaming hot coffee. You can enjoy this along the way. 20 minutes later, they arrived downtown and parked at Irofrate's Italian-American Cafe. Obviously, much more than a cafe, the full-service restaurant was jammed with a line forming at the door. On their way into the building, someone pushed gruffly past them, complaining about how crowded it was, and bumped into Pinder. Much to Joe's surprise, Pinder simply smiled at him. The moment they were inside the door, the maitre d' came over and escorted the two of them to a corner table. Of course, thought Joe, Pinder must be a VIP here. Thank you, Sal, said Pinder. Sal bowed to Pinder and winked at Joe. It struck Joe that Pinder was exceedingly gracious to everyone they encountered, and as they took their seats, Joe asked Pinder about that. It never hurts to be kind to people, Pinder replied. Once, when I was a young man, I was walking to a young lady's home to meet her for our very first date. I was nervous. As I turned onto her street, an older man walked right into me, banging his head into mine and tromping on my foot. He was embarrassed that he hadn't been watching where he was going, and mortified that he might have injured me. No harm done, I assured him. I've been told I have a hard head. I hope you didn't hurt yourself. He laughed with surprise. I wished him a wonderful day and hurried on to meet my young lady friend. About 15 minutes after I'd arrived at the girl's home, I heard the front door open. Daddy, she called out, I want you to meet my date. Pinder stopped and glanced at Joe as if expecting him to finish the story. Joe did, and let me guess, it was the man who had smacked into you. It was, agreed Pinder. Back from a quick trip to the store, he complimented his daughter on her good judgment and told her I was a thoughtful, polite young man. So you could say your relationship got off on the right foot, observed Joe. Pinder laughed. Indeed it did. Stayed that way, too. That beautiful young lady has been my wife for nearly 50 years. Ernesto, he called out to one of the cooks who was headed their way. Buen giorno, caro, Pinder exclaimed. The portly fellow beamed and hunkered down with them at their table. You going to introduce me to your new friend? Ernesto's voice bore traces of a crisp northern Italian accent. Ernesto, this is Joe. Joe? Ernesto. A young waiter approached with a pair of menus, but before Joe or Pinder could say a word, Ernesto turned to the young man and fired off a soft stream of Italian phrases. The waiter whooshed silently away again. Ernesto, said Pinder, tell my young friend how you got started here. Ernesto looked at Joe and said, hot dogs. Joe blinked. Hot dogs? I came here, Ernesto went on. Must be more than 20 years ago now, a foolish young man. I had just enough money saved to buy a hot dog cart and a license to run it. Actually, come to think of it, the license cost me more than the cart. Pinder chuckled, and Joe had the distinct sense that his host had heard this story many times before. It was hard at first, Ernesto was saying, but I had some loyal customers and word got around. After a few years, my little cart got written up in the city's annual Best of Guide. The chef paused to glance back toward the grill. Wow, really? Said Joe. Best hot dog stand in the city? That's great. Pinder smiled and gently corrected him. Best outdoor dining experience in the city. Ernesto held out both hands modestly and shrugged. They were kind to me. But Joe stammered. How did you do that? I mean, no offense, but how does a hot dog stand manage to outrank the swanky sidewalk cafes in this neighborhood? Ernesto gave another theatrical shrug, his eyebrows and shoulders moving together like a marionette, saying, Who knows? He winked at Pinder. Lucky? He glanced back at the grill again. Scusi, uno momento. And he stood up and strode away. Quite a character, Joe noted aloud as they watched Ernesto disappear through a door to the kitchen. Pinder nodded. Indeed he is. Actually, Ernesto is the head chef here. Really? Said Joe. Really, Pinder replied. In fact, he owns the place. Really? Joe was intrigued. Their waiter placed their food before them, and Pinder thanked him. He took his first bite of eggplant parmigiana, closed his eyes, and groaned with pleasure. The man is an artist. It's delicious, Joe agreed. As he dove into the magnificent meal, he thought of how Susan would love this place. The two men ate in silence for nearly a minute before Pinder spoke again. In fact, he owns a half-dozen restaurants now, also several $100 million worth of commercial real estate, all starting with a hot dog stand. Joe dropped the silverware and stared at Pinder, who continued savoring his lunch. He's the guy we came here to meet. The real estate magnate, is him? Ernesto was headed back toward their table as Pinder whispered to Joe, "A very useful thing to remember. Appearances can be deceiving." He slid over to make room for the chef. Truth is, they nearly always are. Ernesto slipped into the booth next to Pinder. Over the next 5 minutes, he and Pinder gave Joe a quick history of his career. Young Ernesto Iafrate's reputation had grown until he was discovered by several business executives who abandoned their local high-class establishments to have their power lunches at the little sidewalk hot dog stand. Although Ernesto really talked about himself, one of these regulars, a man whom Ernesto called simply the Connector, Joe made a mental note to ask Pinder later about this mysterious-sounding character, eventually learned of his background as a chef. Impressed with the young man's sharp business mind and exceptional devotion to service, a few of these executives pulled together an investment group and backed him with the finances to open his own restaurant. And within a few years, Pinder interjected, "His little cafe did so well that he bought us out, earning us all a tidy profit in the process." And he hadn't stopped there. After establishing a group of area restaurants, Ernesto began investing some of his profits in the properties adjoining his restaurants. Over the years, he became one of the largest commercial real estate owners in the city. As he listened, Joe realized there was another layer to Ernesto that he hadn't seen at first. Underneath that jovial, bigger-than-life Italian chef persona, there was a powerful sense of focus and intention. Once Joe became aware of it, it was riveting. He began to see why the little group of executives had invested in this man's future. Joe understood that Pinder emphasized the word experience for a reason. It was not the hot dogs, but the person serving the hot dogs that had vaulted the young man to such popularity, not the dining experience. Ernesto had made buying a hot dog into an unforgettable event. Especially for children, Pinder pointed out. "I've always been good at remembering kids' names," Ernesto explained. "And remembering their birthdays," continued Pinder, "and their favorite colors, and their favorite cartoon heroes, and their best friends' names." He glanced at Joe and gave the next word emphasis, etc. Ernesto gave another trademark shrug. "What can I say? I like kids." Children started dragging their parents to the little hot dog stand. Soon the parents were dragging their friends there too. It turned out that Ernesto was just as gifted at remembering adults' interests as he was with kids. "Everyone likes to be appreciated," said Ernesto. "And that's the golden rule of business," added Pinder, "all things being equal." Ernesto finished the phrase, "People will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust." He turned to look at Joe. "Tell me, what distinguishes a good restaurant from a great restaurant? Why do some restaurants do well while a few like this one do stratospherically well?" "Obviously better food," replied Joe without hesitation. Ernesto's delighted laughter filled the booth. Several heads turned and a wave of smiles rolled through the dining room like ripples on a pond. "Ah, mille grazie, signore. You are a man of good taste. But I have to admit, while our food is very good, there are half a dozen other places within 3 blocks with food just as wonderful as ours. Still, even on their best nights, they're lucky to have half the clientele that comes here. Why is that, do you think?" Joe had no answer. "A bad restaurant," Ernesto went on, "tries to give just enough food and service, both in quantity and quality, to justify the money it takes from the customer. A good restaurant strives to give the most quantity and quality for the money it takes. But a great restaurant strives to defy imagination. Its goal is to provide a higher quality of food and service than any amount of money could possibly pay for." He looked at Pinder, then back at Joe. "Did the old man tell you he would show you his 5 laws?" Joe nodded eagerly. He was about to learn the first law of stratospheric success. Ernesto looked again at Pinder. Should I tell him? Please, replied Pinder. Ernesto leaned in and spoke in a conspiratorial whisper. Your true worth is determined by how much you give in value than you take in payment. Joe wasn't sure how to respond. Giving away more value than you get paid for, that was their big secret? I'm sorry, I don't get it, Joe confessed. I mean, I appreciate where you're coming from, and your story is obviously, well, it's amazing. But honestly, that sounds like a recipe for bankruptcy. It's almost like you're trying to avoid making money. Not at all. Ernesto waggled one finger. Does it make money? Is not a bad question. It's a great question. It's just a bad first question. It starts you out pointing in the wrong direction. He let Joe ponder that for a moment, then continued. The first question should be, does it serve? Does it add value to others? If the answer to that question is yes, then you can go ahead and ask, does it make money? In other words, said Joe, exceed people's expectations and they'll pay you even more. That's one way to look at it, replied Ernesto, but the point isn't to have them pay you more, it's to give them more. You give, give, give. Why? Another shrug. Because you love to. It's not a strategy, it's a way of life. And when you do, he added with a big grin, then very, very profitable things begin to happen. Wait, said Joe. So profitable things begin to happen? But I thought you said you're not thinking about the results. That's right, Ernesto agreed. You're not. But that doesn't mean they won't happen.